Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at this match day poster design and reverse engineering it to create a wallpaper like this one. Let's get started. Once I've selected the main image I'm going to be working with, I need to remove the subject from the background. Now there are many ways to do this, and more often than not, you'll probably need to combine methods to get the cleanest cut. To start off, I'm going to use a tool that many people don't even realize that Photoshop has now. It's called the Quick Selection tool, and you can find it if you right-click on the magic wand icon on the toolbar and then choose Quick Selection tool from the menu that appears. I'm going to duplicate the background layer and then, with the new layer selected, make sure that Add to Selection is chosen in the top menu. Then move over and click the Select Subject button. And like magic, a selection is placed around the subject. Now it's not perfect. If I zoom in, you can see that some areas didn't get picked up. That's okay though. I can just go in and use the pen tool and eraser tool to clean up the edges and erase areas that were missed. Now before I do that, I'm going to go in with the Quick Selection tool still equipped, and by using these options up here in the top menu, Add to Selection and Subtract from Selection, I can kind of go in and help clean up these edges just a little bit more. Now that I have a nice clean cutout, I'm going to adjust the levels a little, just to add some contrast. Next, I'll add the cutout to the composition that will be my wallpaper. After adding this layer into the composition, I right-click on it and convert to Smart Object. This allows me to adjust the scale of the layer without losing quality. Also, you can double-click on the layer and it opens up a new window. Any changes made here will affect the layer in the wallpaper file. If you're unfamiliar with Smart Objects, I recommend playing around with them because they're very useful. Going to Image, Adjustments, Black and White will bring up the Black and White menu, or you can use the hotkey Alt-Shift-Control-B. This is much nicer than simply using Desaturate because it gives you more control over the black and white image. Using this menu, I can adjust each color channel individually to really get the look I'm going for. In this case, I want the skin tones to be a very light value, so I push the red and yellow channels up. Alternatively, I want to push the cyans, blues, and greens back in order to make McCaffrey's uniform a really dark value. You'll see why in a minute. Next, I use levels again to really bring out those light values and push back the darker ones. Then I duplicate my original layer and move it above my new black and white layer. Then I just hide it again because I'm not quite ready to use it yet. You'll often see me duplicating and deleting layers. I do this because I'm about to make a big change to a layer and I want to make sure that I can easily revert back if I've made too many mistakes or I don't like where it's going. Okay, so here, with my black and white layer still selected, I'm using Color Range. You can get to this by going to Select in the top menu and choosing Color Range from the drop-down menu that appears. I want to use the eyedropper tool and select the black parts of the image. Often you'll need to adjust the fuzziness slider here, but there's no need to do it for this one. When I press OK, I'll get a new selection around the pixels that match this color range I've chosen. Now I'll just unhide the color layer that I duplicated earlier, and with this color layer selected, I press Ctrl J and duplicate my selection. Now I have a layer that is only the blue colors of McCaffrey's uniform, and I can delete the extra black and white layer that I just made. As a side note, I didn't actually need to duplicate the black and white layer here, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not a bad habit to get into. Now, back in the wallpaper file, I can move McCaffrey around and position him where he needs to be. I decided I wanted the blues to be more saturated, so I used color balance to bring out the cyans in the image. I also go to Image, Adjustments, Channel Mixer, and take the green values all the way down and push up the reds. There, a nice vibrant blue. Looking back at the reference image, you can see that there's some sort of paper texture applied to the background. I open up my own paper texture asset and I begin work desaturating it and playing with the level adjustments and different blend modes. It took some playing around with to get it where it needed to be, but when I was happy with the levels and contrast, I duplicated the texture to cover the entire background and then merged all the layers back into one. Made sure the layer was above my gray background layer, and then applied a soft light blending mode. Using a large soft brush on a layer just above the texture layer, I gently add in some white to help break up the texture pattern. I set the opacity for this layer to 81%. I realized that my texture layer isn't dark enough, so I duplicate that layer and then bump the opacity down to 84%, just to better match the reference image. Now it's time for a little bit of housekeeping by renaming and regrouping some of my layers. I need another picture of McCaffrey for the wallpaper. I searched Google Images to find an image that will work. In order to better match the reference, I want to find McCaffrey without his helmet and ideally looking off to his right, so his line of sight will help guide the viewer across the wallpaper. This one looks like it'll work. After removing McCaffrey from the background, I used the black and white menu like before to desaturate the layer and adjust the values as needed. After a quick levels adjustment, I placed this new layer above my background layers but below the texture layers. I play around with different settings and blend modes, but eventually end up using the darker color blend mode with an opacity of 68%. I add a layer mask by making sure the layer is selected and then clicking the Add Layer Mask icon below the Layers panel. Then, making sure that the new layer mask is selected, I use a large soft brush and begin painting out the parts of the image I don't need. Make sure you're painting with black for this step. If you mess up, you can change the color to white and paint back over it. Basically, the black parts of the mask hide the image and the white parts reveal it. Once I get this how I like it, I set the layer's opacity to 82%. Now it's time for the text. On the Panther's text, I set the layer fill to 0% with an inside stroke at size 5. I set the color to a blue that I sampled from the image. Then I add the rest of the text, playing around a bit with the fonts and the colors. I'll include links in the description for you to download the fonts as well as other assets that I've used in this video. Now let's not forget to add a shadow. To do this, I just use a soft round brush on a new layer and then just squish it down to be the right size and shape. After making sure it's positioned correctly, I move the layer to be somewhere between my background and texture layers. Now the original reference image has these paint strokes going down the side of the image. To do this, I'll use these paint brushes that I downloaded. I noticed that the brushes are a little too transparent, so I duplicate the layer a few times and merge them all back together to get a more opaque layer here. After repeating this a few times, I've got a nice blue paint stroke going down the side of my image. And we're done. Take these techniques and apply them to your own design. Then feel free to share them with me on Twitter or Instagram. If you learned something, then consider leaving a thumbs up and letting me know how you did. Until next time, remember, creativity is contagious, so pass it on.